Good morning, good morning, good morning. Do what?
This is Friday.
This is Friday. Yesterday I said have a wonderful Wednesday, and it was Thursday. It was a thankful Thursday. We're here, and I'm so excited on this January 11th. It's a fabulous Friday today with fabulous stories in the Bible. And we get to read about Genesis 24 through 26, and we're reading about Abraham and his son Isaac. We're actually reading about Isaac and Rebekah. We are reading about Abraham too, but what a wonderful, wonderful love story. It's a wonderful love story. You know, no matter what kind of literature you like to read, that category is in the Bible. So I love romances, and there's a lot of romance in the Bible. But we also get to read about, well, I just want to point out a couple of things, because you remember that Abraham's servant brought Rebekah back, and that's how we open up, is that Rebekah is coming back. She covers her face with a veil. Isaac sees him from far off. He comes out to greet him. She gets down off of her ride or whatever she was on. Camel, thank you. Down off of her camel. And they get to meet for the first time. And, oh, that's so romantic. And then I love verse 67. And Isaac brought Rebekah into his mother Sarah's tent, and she became his wife, and he loved her deeply. Love that. And she was a special comfort to him after the death of his mother. I mean, I'm just telling you, I could preach on those two sentences for a long time. He loved her deeply, and she was of great comfort to him. Just stop for a moment and examine your relationship you have right now. And if you don't happen to be married, I want you to examine your relationship with God. And he loved her deeply, and she was a special comfort to him. Are you a comfort to God? Ladies, are you a comfort to your husband? Men, do you love her deeply? If the answer is no, that's your call first to prayer. Deep prayer. If the love in your heart has gone away for your spouse, God is the only thing that will revive it.
Unknown caller.
Love those spam calls, robocalls. God is the only thing that will revive it. And if you ask him, and if you submit to him, he will revive it. And if you're not satisfied with the level you have right now, ask him and he'll deepen it. But it's a die to self. It is a I give myself to you, Father. Not I give myself to my wife or my husband. It's a I give myself to you to do with as you would have done. Because we have a picture. He loved her deeply, and she was a special comfort to him. And in verse 5, Abraham gave everything he owned to his son Isaac. Everything he owned he gave to Isaac. Of course, that's the way things worked back then. The firstborn was supposed to get everything. This was his firstborn with Sarah. And then we read, starting in chapter 12, verse 12, I'm sorry. Yes, about Ishmael, which was his firstborn from Hagar. The 12 tribes from Ishmael. And then it goes on, and it's starting in verse 21. We see Abraham and Sarah's story repeating itself with Isaac and Rebekah. Verse 21, Isaac pleaded with the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was unable to have children. So she didn't have to wait till she was 99 like Sarah did. She had a child, and actually she had twins. And the Lord told her, the sons in your womb, verse 23, will become two nations. From the very beginning, the two nations will be rivals. One nation will be stronger than the other, and your older son will serve your younger son. Isaac was 60 years old when the twins were born in verse 27. And as the boys grew up, Esau became a skillful hunter. He was an outdoorsman, but Jacob had a quiet temperament, preferring to stay at home. And then here's where the trouble begins. Isaac loved Esau because he enjoyed eating the wild game Esau brought home, but Rebekah loved Jacob. If you're a parent and you find yourself preferring one child over another, you need to take that to the cross. And you need to say, Father God, balance me. Balance me. Help me with that, Father. Help me to grow my love for the one that's least preferred, and help me balance my love for the other one. Because the things that happen from here on out is because Mom and Dad got out of balance. As much as they loved each other, as much as they served with each other, they got out of balance. We get to read the story where Jacob makes a stew, and Esau's so hungry, so Esau sells his birthrights as the firstborn to Jacob. We just get to see the fallenness of man here. We get to see generational curses at work is what we get to see. Verse 2 of chapter 26, the Lord appeared to Isaac and said, do not go down to Egypt. So what's happened is there's a famine now in the land. And remember that Isaac is in the land of his father Abraham, and that land is the land that God gave to Abraham and told him that he'd be the father of many nations, and that his descendants would be more than the stars in the sky that he could count. And so this was God's land. This was the land that he gave this family. And a severe famine came, and most people were leaving, but God appeared to Isaac and told him not to leave. And these are powerful words if you'll read this. I mean, if you'll let this be a love letter to you in a time of extreme famine, when people are fleeing like crazy because there's no food to eat, God speaks to Isaac and says, don't leave. And he sees Isaac stay, and Isaac gets to see how God provides. Isaac at that point in time stopped looking at the land and his job and what he did for a living as his source, and he saw God as his source. I mean, what is it in your life that's lacking? What is it that God has said to you? That's why it's so important. These whole Bible studies are designed for 3 purposes: to get you to read. I'm sorry, let me start all over. Number 1 is to get you to pray. I've said this many, many times. I want you to pray. Open up that dialogue with God. Tell him, pour it all out. I mean, if you're fearful, tell him. If you're mad, tell him. If you're unsure, if you're confused, if you're full of joy, if you're full of praise, there are no words that God doesn't want to hear from you. He wants it all right where you're at. He meets us right where we're at. And that opens that dialogue. It starts the intimate relationship that we pray to him, and then we still ourselves and we listen. And you know what? Just now speaking this, I know I've gone 2 or 3 days now that I haven't spent the amount of time I need to listening. I know that. Pray, listen, and then read. Read. And don't limit it to this. This is a starting place. This 1-year Bible starts our day off in the Word. It's a first fruits of our day, the first time in our day. I highly recommend you do it in the morning, but you don't have to do it in the morning. You're giving of a 24-hour period of time the first fruits of the day by studying God's Word. But then as He reveals things to you, take that and expand on it through a Bible study that you do at a different time during the day. But that's the 3 purposes of this. Not to follow Elizabeth, not to hear Elizabeth's stories. I'm here for encouragement. I encourage you to pray. I encourage you to listen. And I encourage you to read, starting with these. And if reading the full 15-minute reading in the morning is tough for you right now, read a Psalms each day. Or read a Proverbs, or just read the New Testament each day. But this year, do just a little bit better than you did last year. And we're watching how history repeats itself. We've heard that so many times in the family of Jacob and Isaac. And then we see the struggle that starts with the two children, the twins, that was born. And then we get to see God speak directly to Isaac, and he repeats the promise in verse 4. I will cause your descendants to become as numerous as the stars of the sky. So where we see generational curses continue, we see the blessings continue. And what we don't see is any of God's wrath at this point. I will cause your descendants to become as numerous as the stars of the sky, and I will give them all these lands. And through your descendants, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. I will do this because Abraham listened to me and obeyed all my requirements, commands, decrees, and instructions. So Isaac stayed in the land. So, and then right into the next paragraph is Isaac tells the people in the land that Rebekah's his sister, just like Abraham did with Sarah twice. History repeats itself. Verse 12, when Isaac planted his crops that year. Now remember, I just want to recap so that we understand what's happened. So Rebekah and Isaac come together as husband and wife. They have trouble having a child. Isaac prays, God answers, and she has twins. There's a struggle with the twins, and then there's a famine in the land. And Isaac, God appears to Isaac and tells him to stay, and he chooses to obey God. So he had to, at some point in time, be praying. He had to listen, and then he had to obey what was told to him. And when he did, verse 12, when Isaac planted his crops that year, he harvested 100 times more grain than he planted, for the Lord blessed him. You know, my scriptures for 2019 tells me that the seed's still in the barn. And right here, as that seed comes out of the barn, I'm going to harvest 100 times more grain, 100 times more seed than I plant. When we obey, we'll harvest 100 times more seed than what we plant. For the Lord blessed him. He became a very rich man, and his wealth continued to grow. He acquired so many flocks of sheep and goats, herds of cattle, and servants that the Philistines became jealous of him. So the Philistines filled up all of Isaac's wells with dirt. So he was so rich and so powerful, had so much wealth, that the enemies come against us. So careful what you pray for. You know, if you're praying for wealth's sake, I'll pray for you. You know, we're blessed to be a blessing. We should be the funnels that anything that comes into us ought to be flowing out to others all the time. All the time. We're to be good stewards of the blessings that God's given us. And when we're the epitome of that definition of good steward, we'll give our last penny. Who is it in the Bible that Jesus praises and exhorts the most? It's the woman who came into the temple and gave her last penny with no thought of how she was going to feed herself from that point forward. Her last penny. That's who Jesus praised. And then Matthew 8 is one of my favorite stories in the Bible. It has, in the last 2 years, has just, it's changed me. I don't know how else to say it. And it continues to change me. And I want to share a little bit of that with you. So when Jesus saw the crowd around him, he instructed his disciples to cross the other side. Now, who was his disciples? The majority of his disciples were fishermen. They professional fishermen. These men had been on the seas in this area. They had their own boats. They were professional fishermen. They knew these seas, and they'd been on the water in some of the most severe storms. They knew what a storm was like in their boat. Then one of the teachers of religious law said to him, "Teacher, I'll follow you wherever you go." But Jesus replied, "Foxes have dens to live in, and birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place even to lay his head." Another of his disciples then said, Lord, first let me return home and bury my father. But Jesus told him, follow me now. Let the spiritually dead bury their own dead. Now I'll let you unpack that, and God will speak to you right where you're at in those two scriptures. I want to pick up in verse 23. So remember, verse 1 of chapter 8, when Jesus saw the crowd, it would be verse 18, I'm sorry. When Jesus saw the crowd around him, he instructed his disciples to cross to the other side of the lake. He told them to get in the boat. Then Jesus got into the boat and started across the lake with his disciples. Suddenly, there is that word again. Suddenly, a fierce storm struck the lake, with waves breaking into the boat. Now, they didn't have great big ships like we have now. They didn't have electric or gas or diesel or coal-fired engines to propel those boats across. They had to use oars, and they had to use sails to get where they were going. Suddenly, a fierce storm struck the lake with waves breaking into the boat, but Jesus was sleeping. You know, one of the other Gospels will say he was in the bottom of the boat sleeping. You know, he was sleeping. What kind of a bed did he have on this boat? You know, he might have had a blanket. I doubt that he had a pillow. He was just going to cross over. He wasn't getting on this boat to live on the boat. And in the midst of the fierce storm, it's a fierce storm that struck, he was sleeping. And then the same disciples that I told you, when you think about their background, were fishermen, had been on the same lake many, many times, woke him up shouting, Lord, save us, we're going to drown. We're going to drown. Now, Jesus is in the bottom of the boat, and he's directed everybody to get on the boat. When he directed them to get on the boat, who is Jesus? Jesus is God himself in the form of man. Jesus already knew there's a storm. He already knew the disciples would be afraid, and he still took them on the boat, knowing there would be a storm, and knowing their fear would be so great they seriously would believe they were going to die, and he still instructed them to get on the boat. And then he's in the bottom of the boat, and he chooses to sleep. That is our picture of supreme divine peace in the midst of the worst storm you've ever had. We can have peace when the storm rages around us, when we trust God, when we trust him. That is the picture of having pure peace. Now it's also getting to know who our Father is, because again, God incarnate in man, Jesus Christ, slept while the very people he loved the most was so afraid they thought they were going to, so afraid that they shouted at him. Can you imagine having the guts to shout at Jesus Christ face to face? That's how scared they were that they were going to die. You know, and Jesus in the bottom of the boat, and he knew about their fear, and he knew about the storm. So he knew about their fear, and he knew about the storm, and yet he didn't call off the storm. He let the storm come, and he didn't call off the fear. He let them experience their fear, but he also made it that they had to come to him with their fear, and he was okay that they shouted at him. He didn't reprimand them for being disrespectful, and he responded, "Why are you afraid? You have so little faith." Then he got up, rebuked the wind and the waves, and suddenly, there was a great calm. He took authority over the wind of the waves to the point that they were amazed. The disciples were amazed. Who is this man? Even the winds and waves obey him. You do know that this same Jesus told them later on that the same authority I have, you have. That is his words to us. The same authority I have, you have, Montana. The same authority I have, you have, Sarah and Rhonda and Kim and Tom and Elizabeth. When I wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning in extreme pain, we get to speak directly to the pain as he spoke directly to the wind and the waves. And we say, pain be gone. We say, sinus be gone. Sore throat be gone in the middle of the night. Boy, it's powerful stuff. And I think I'll end with the Proverbs. There was more stuff I had, but I've talked too long already. Proverbs 3:7-8. Don't be impressed with your own wisdom. Let that sink in. Don't be impressed with your own wisdom. Instead, fear the Lord and turn away from evil. Then you will have healing for your body and strength for your bones. Have a fabulous Friday. I'm so excited. My son's getting married tomorrow. He's getting married in my home. Appreciate your prayers. I get to be the one that marries him. What an honor and a privilege that is. So anyway, I love you guys. Have a great weekend.